The background to the schools is that the first school was opened by a group of parents who in the 1970s wanted a school where their children could be educated together, where every child would be treated on an equal basis in the school and where no child was an outsider. So it was a long campaign, but the first school was established in Dublin in 1978. And since then, the movement has grown. We have 95 primary schools now in 21 counties, with one more opening this September. Then at second level, I suppose the campaigns started to emerge in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Parents wanted a second level option for their children to continue within the same ethos. And we opened the first 3 Educate Together second level schools in 2014, and there are 17 now around the country, including voluntary secondary schools and community colleges. So altogether, that's 117 schools in the network now, and there's about 33,000 students in them. What's interesting about the ethos is how well it stood the test of time. So the foundations on which the first schools were based back in the 1970s and 80s led to the development of a charter, and that charter has been in place now for 40 years. The schools are based on 4 ethos principles. The first is that they're equality-based, and that means that all children are guaranteed equality of access and esteem, regardless of their background, their social, cultural, religious background. The second principle is that schools are co-educational, and that means that stereotypes are challenged and every child is supported to reach their full potential, regardless of their identity. The third principle is that they are child-centred, and that doesn't just mean in teaching and learning, it means in all of the decisions that happen in the school. Children's interests are first and foremost. And finally, schools are democratically run, which in the early days meant a very strong focus on parental involvement. And then that has broadened out to encompass student participation, while also respecting the professional role of teachers. So it's a kind of a 3-way partnership, that democratic approach between teachers, parents and students.
We wanted to develop a quality framework for Ethos because Educate Together has been around for over 40 years. And in the beginning, it was really clear to the small number of schools what the model was and what they were trying to achieve. And over the years, as the network has grown, and particularly over the last 10 years, the network has grown quite rapidly, we needed to establish clarity over what the Educate Together ethos is and what that means in practice for schools. We knew we wanted to develop a quality framework that met the needs of our schools, and we talked to a number of different people, and we were delighted then to invite EQI to take this contract in developing the quality framework because of the standing of the centre within DCU, because of the fantastic work that the centre had done in school evaluation and inspections, but particularly the work that Siobhan O'Brien had done before with Centres for Education, where she had developed a very similar approach and framework, and that gave us great confidence that something similar had been done before, albeit in a different context and maybe a different format. So we were delighted to have EQI and DCU, work with us on this. It also was important, I think, for a known, institution like DCU and EQI for our schools to have the confidence that we were working with somebody who knew what they were doing and was very well established in this area.
EQI is the Centre for Evaluation, Quality and Inspection, and it's a research centre based at the DCU Institute of Education that looks at those 3 things. It looks at the issue of quality in education and looks at the mechanisms for achieving that, and 2 broadly based ones. One is evaluation and another is inspection.
This project presented a really interesting challenge. Educate Together had come to us to ask us to develop a quality framework for Ethos, but yet there was very few examples of anything similar to look at. School ethos is this idea that's really important for schools, but yet it's a relatively obscure idea. Some people would say that school ethos is really difficult to recognise, it's really difficult to measure, and it's also really difficult to improve. But that's exactly the challenge that we had been given.
We asked EQI to develop a framework for us that would be very clear, that would be a relatively easy lift for our schools, so that would fit into what schools already had to do, but that would also, give schools an opportunity to assess themselves against the Educate Together ethos.
What I proposed to Educate Together was to develop a quality framework, including a set of standards and statements of effective practice that was based on their charter. And then what I proposed was to develop a self-evaluation process, including detailed guidelines and a set of tools that teachers could use to gather data in each of their schools. And following that, I suggested that we would test out this process by piloting it in a number of primary and post-primary schools. SSE is a school improvement process that has been mandatory in Ireland since 2012. It follows the normal school improvement cycle where teachers identify what they want to evaluate, they gather data, they develop a school self-evaluation report, a school improvement plan, and then most importantly, they implement those improvements. From research we've carried out here in EQI, we know that SSE can be really challenging for schools and for teachers. And over the years, we've tried to test out a number of models of professional development and support for schools that would make the process much easier for schools to engage with and also to build capacity within the schools for SSE. We provided 4 training sessions which were based at the DCU Institute of Education and were attended by the teacher who was leading the SSE process in each of the schools. Each training session prepared the teachers to implement the next stage of the process back in their own schools.
We approached the inspectorate and told them what we were doing, and we were delighted that they came on board and allowed the pilot schools, because we had 20 pilot schools who were piloting this approach over the course of a year, and the department allowed them to recognise that as their formal SSE for that year.
The support from DCU was amazing. Each of the information sessions and training sessions were so well prepared. We had guidelines that were really clear that we could use in our meetings. There were step-by-step everything that we were supposed to do. There were sample questionnaires, there was sample targets, there were everything that you might need. There was also support from the facilitators if we needed to speak to anybody. Everyone was always available on email. It was amazing support and made the process really, really easy.
For me, I just found the support absolutely excellent from day one. I suppose I hadn't much experience with SSE in general, so I felt very confident from day one, having attended the seminar the first day. And then the guidelines and the information provided to the school, everything on the Google Drive, everything shared, was very informative. And it gave us a great start.
DCU provided a number of things in way of support. First of all, Siobhan O'Brien is the person who was leading and the person who was helping us. And Siobhan is someone who's, I know, has been involved and is passionate about SSE for a number of years. So to be able to bring that knowledge and to be able to kind of link up the theory and the practice, I think was really interesting for us.
I thought the training programme was very practical and relevant to each step of the process, and it was a supportive environment where we could listen to other teachers' experiences of leading SSE within their school.
First off, it was reassuring from the get-go. The very first meeting at that pilot meeting, when we were given the framework and a very clear layout of exactly what steps would be involved, it just meant that, I suppose, like I said earlier, with that I suppose overwhelming feeling just went immediately, because you could see very clearly exactly what the expectations were, and it was broken down into very clear steps.
The quality standards, because they mapped to the Looking at Our Schools framework, it meant you could immediately see how they could be implemented in a school self-evaluation process. And then the resources, again, it was kind of a starting point where you could develop your own surveys and your own questionnaires. And then you also had the actual template for school self-evaluation, which actually laid out exactly how to go about the process.
Having a quality framework after 40 years, I mean, it's early days, but we hope it might be a kind of a coming of age for the organisation. So writing down what it is that you do in some ways feels quite concrete. It gives us a bit of confidence and to stand up and say, this is what our schools are about. And that's very important because we need to grow. All of our schools are still heavily oversubscribed. There's far more demand for Educate Together schools than we can meet at the moment. And having a really clear framework helps other people see exactly what it is Educate Together schools are. And it also gives us a focus for our work to support ethos and to support quality as we grow. The second thing I would say is that there is I suppose what I would see as a dangerous push towards measurement and maybe a negative impact of an idea of standards in education. I think globally, in Ireland, that manifests itself as a very strong focus on exams. Exams are understood to be the standards in some ways, and at second level especially, and there is, I suppose, a dangerous increase in focus on standardised testing at primary as well. So what this gives us is an alternative set of standards. We can say, this is what we want to do, this is what's important to us, including every child, promoting equality, engaging students in decision making. These are the things that matter to us. And if we have a set of standards to strive for, it makes it easier to keep the focus on that.
I'm really thrilled that we have a really comprehensive set of tools for our Educate Together schools, ranging from guidance around our ethos, but then also obviously the quality framework, which includes a whole set of tools for schools to self-evaluate themselves on the Educate Together ethos, and that will have enormous impact going forward into the future. I mean, I summarise it kind of with 3 C's, that it gives the National Office and Educate Together network and the schools clarity around the Educate Together ethos, what the 4 principles stand for. It also then provides the schools comfort when they do carry out an SSE in ethos, comfort to know where they are in terms of that ethos standard, and also comfort to know that they have a plan as to how they can improve, comfort to affirm themselves in the good practice that they're doing. And also then finally continuity. The framework, the quality framework, provides schools with the continuity of self-evaluation, a continuous process of self-evaluation and school improvement, which is very much, what we're trying to achieve for schools, but also very much aligned, of course, with what the department is trying to do and trying to build that practice of good skills in school improvement and self-evaluation.
I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to be involved in this process, to work with the staff in Educate Together National Office and particularly the teachers in each of the schools engaged in the pilot phase. Educate Together as a patron body is a custodian for a set of values for this network of schools, which reflect a set of shared global values which are about promoting a sustainable, equitable and fair society. So I'm really delighted that I had this opportunity to be involved in this initiative and to contribute in some small way to the promotion of these values in schools.
At the core of any educational research is the capacity to impact and influence the reality in schools. So as a research centre, EQI really wants to be in a situation where we're doing impactful research that has a meaningful role in changing education provision at all levels across the continuum of education. And the opportunity to work with Educate Together is a really critically important one for us in this way, because as a school patron body, as a body who has direct control and direct influence on the day-to-day nature of education for many children and many school communities, they're a centrally important grouping for us to be engaged with.